Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a figure whose very name became synonymous with an entire era, Queen Victoria.
Mm-hmm. An entire era, quite literally.
Exactly. For this exploration, we've pulled together fascinating insights from a source titled Queen Victoria, Bir Imperator Lusun Sembolu ve Victorian Şahsın Mimariu, which translates to Queen Victoria, symbol of an empire and architect of an era.
A very apt title, I think. Captures that duality quite well.
It really is. Our mission today is to peel back the layers of her incredibly long and influential reign. We're going to explore how she navigated her complex role in a rapidly changing world, how her deeply personal life intertwined with monumental political
And
shifts.
they really were monumental shifts.
Absolutely. And also why, even today, her name evokes so much about an age of immense transformation. You might think you know Queen Victoria, but prepare for some surprising facts, maybe some fresh perspectives, and those genuine aha moments that reveal just how much her story shaped our own.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is the delicate balance she struck. On the one hand, being this powerful, symbolic figurehead,
The ultimate symbol. Yeah.
and on the other, exerting a very real, albeit often indirect, influence on what was then the world's most powerful empire. We'll explore how she became both a product and a driving force of her time.
Actively shaping things, even while being shaped herself.
Precisely. It's that dynamic interplay that's so compelling.
So let's cast our minds back. Way back to the very beginning. Who was the young woman who would eventually become Queen Victoria? What was her early life truly like before she stepped onto the world stage?
Well, she was born Alexandrina Victoria on May 24, 1819, right here in London.
Named after her mother, Princess Victoria, and also, interestingly, her distant great-great-grandmother.
Right. And her family, of course, part of England's Hanover dynasty, a German royal house, which is key to understanding those later European connections. They had been on the British throne since the early 18th century.
But her early life was marked by tragedy, wasn't it? Her father, Duke Edward, died when she was less than a year old.
That paternal absence was absolutely crucial. It changed everything. It meant her childhood was spent almost entirely under the strict, very watchful eye of her widowed mother, and crucially, her mother's comptroller, Sir John Conroy.
Ah, Conroy. He looms large in this early part of the story.
He does. And together, they instituted what became known as the Kensington system. And this wasn't just, a slightly disciplined upbringing.
No, the source describes it as quite restrictive and controlled, almost isolationist.
Exactly. Imagine a childhood in Kensington Palace marked by profound loneliness. Rigid rules dictating almost every single hour of her day. An almost obsessive level of control over who she saw, what she did.
She couldn't even walk downstairs alone.
Reportedly not without holding an adult's hand. Couldn't meet anyone without her mother or Conroy present. It was intense.
Yet, amidst all that control, there was this meticulous, disciplined education.
Yes, and that's the paradox. It was strategic. They wanted to mold her, keep her dependent, but they immersed her in history, law, political economy, languages she mastered: German, French, Italian.
So, while it was meant to control her,
It inadvertently cultivated this really keen interest in state affairs. It prepared her, maybe unexpectedly, for the huge responsibilities ahead. It fostered a strong will to, an independent mind pushing against those restrictions.
fascinating. And her path to the throne itself wasn't exactly straightforward, was it? It was quite surprising.
Not at all. She became the heir apparent when her uncle, George V's only legitimate child, Princess Charlotte, died young. But then her other uncle, William V, took the throne.
Right, and everyone sort of assumed William V would have children who'd come before Victoria.
Exactly. But he died childless in 1837. And suddenly, almost out of the blue, Victoria, at the remarkably young age of 18, ascends the throne. June 20, 1837.
Just 18, one of the youngest monarchs in English history, thrust into this immense role.
It truly was a whirlwind. Can you imagine? Being 18, having lived this incredibly controlled, almost isolated life.
And suddenly you're the ruler of this vast global empire.
The empire on which the sun literally never set. What sort of immediate, just visceral challenges would that present? It's almost unfathomable.
And initially, how was she perceived? The source says seen more as a symbol.
Well, yes, partly because it was already a constitutional monarchy. The monarch didn't wield direct executive power anymore that rested with Parliament.
But she asserted herself quite quickly, didn't she? Especially against her mother and Conroy.
Oh, immediately. That was one of her first acts, essentially banishing Conroy from her household. She accepted and respected the parliamentary system, though. She understood the rules. She relied heavily on her advisors, recognizing her powerly and guidance influence, not direct command.
And a key figure pops up here early on, Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister.
Absolutely crucial. He became almost a surrogate father figure. He provided invaluable support, guided her through the complexities of state affairs.
Taught her the ropes of being a constitutional monarch.
Exactly. It was a period of intense learning for her political maturation, as the source puts it. Despite the royal family's diminished direct power in 19th century England, Victoria very successfully managed to define her own role.
Which really brings us to that core question. In a constitutional monarchy, how does a symbolic figurehead still exert real influence?
And Victoria started figuring that out right away, forging her own path, learning that subtle art of royal power, not through dictation, but through understanding, carefully cultivating relationships, exercising moral authority, and just showing this profound dedication to her duty.
Okay, so she takes the throne, young, relatively inexperienced in this constitutional setup. How did she actually approach the huge political challenges of her time? What was her vision for the crown?
Her philosophy was really rooted in that constitutional framework. She understood it, she championed it, even when, she sometimes privately chafed against its limits.
She had that famous statement, didn't she, about the ruler serving the people?
The ruler should serve the people, and the people should respect their ruler.
Yes.
And that wasn't just a line. It genuinely seemed to guide her, that profound sense of duty.
So, not intervening directly in day-to-day politics like an absolute monarch might.
No, her method was more subtle, but perhaps just as powerful in its way. She maintained these close relationships with her advisors, prime ministers, cabinet members, key officials. She read everything, parliamentary papers, dispatches, often adding her own sharp handwritten comments in the margins.
So influence through counsel, persuasion.
And the immense moral authority that the crown still held. The source describes her as a cautious but determined figure in foreign affairs and imperial policy.
A blend of prudence and resolve, which must have been critical given what was happening with the British Empire.
Oh, absolutely. Under her reign, it reached its widest boundaries in world history. It's staggering to think about. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, huge swaths of Africa.
From tiny islands to entire continents.
It truly was the era when that phrase, the empire on which the sun never sets, became literal, an unprecedented global reach, and Victoria herself became the central, unifying symbol of this sprawling, diverse, and often deeply contradictory empire.
That symbolic power seems key, doesn't it? Holding it all together.
Absolutely crucial, especially for uniting such a geographically, culturally, linguistically diverse entity. Her image on coins, stamps, portraits, her very name, became the face of global British influence. It provided a common thread, a sense of continuity, however imposed, for millions across continents.
From London to Delhi to Vancouver, as you said.
Right. But we have to acknowledge, and the source implies this too, this expansion wasn't benign. It came at a significant human cost for colonized peoples. Exploitation of resources, suppression of cultures, often brutal military campaigns. That's a vital part of the historical context.
Definitely. And while this vast empire was expanding outwards, there were huge issues brewing at home domestically. A real contrast sometimes to those narratives of imperial glory.
A stark contrast. Politically, you saw this gradual but really significant expansion of the electorate, a series of reform laws.
We're talking about things like the 1832 Great Reform Act, then later the 1867 and 1884 Acts.
Exactly. These weren't just minor tweaks. They dramatically expanded the franchise, bringing millions more working-class men into the political system. This fundamentally shifted the power balance in Parliament, making governments much more accountable to popular opinion, less tied to just the old aristocratic interests.
And this political change was happening alongside the massive upheaval of the Industrial Revolution,
which was both a source of immense national wealth and power, but also brought profound social problems. Overcrowded, frankly filthy urban slums, widespread child labor in factories and mines, incredibly dangerous working conditions, staggering poverty.
The dark side of progress.
Very much so. And legislation started to emerge to address these issues. Notably, Queen Victoria herself, often supported and encouraged by Prince Albert, gave her backing to social progress.
Things like worker rights, even child labor bans.
Yes, though the progress on worker rights was often slow and hard-won. But the child labor legislation was genuinely groundbreaking for the time. These were foundational shifts, reflecting a growing, if reluctant, awareness of the social costs of industrialization.
But not all domestic issues were so easily addressed, even with legislation. The Irish question looms large throughout her reign.
Painfully so. It left its mark on British politics for the entire era, as the source says. You have the devastating Great Famine in the 1840s, a catastrophe. Over 1 million deaths, millions emigrating,
Fundamentally altering Ireland's demographic and political landscape.
and a famine made much worse by British policy and, frankly, neglect. It poisoned the relationship between the two nations, fueling movements for home rule and land reform, which were often met with a really fierce resistance from London.
It really stands out, that contrast, this massive empire, growing wealth, but also these deep fissures and failures at home. How does a monarch, even a symbolic one, navigate something like the Irish famine?
It highlights the limits, doesn't it? The limits of symbolic power in the face of such catastrophe. Victoria expressed sympathy, apparently, but politically, her hands were largely tied by the constitutional system, and the suffering in Ireland became this enduring symbol of the empire's deep contradictions.
Now, moving away from pure politics, there's this deeply personal story that fundamentally shaped her reign. Her marriage to Prince Albert.
Ah, yes. This is where things get really interesting on a personal level, and how that personal bond just resonated through everything.
Her marriage to her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1840, the source says it marked a new period in her life.
A profound shift. Remember that isolated upbringing. Albert offered companionship, intellectual partnership, emotional support. Their relationship was described by many, and by Victoria herself, as very passionate and sincere.
More than just a husband, though. He became her indispensable advisor.
Her closest advisor, yes,
Yeah.
and a strong supporter in politics and imperial affairs. She valued his counsel immensely, sometimes above her ministers.
And together they had 9 children?
An astonishing number, really, given her role. And it's through these children that she earned that famous nickname, Europe's grandmother.
How did that happen? Through strategic marriages?
Exactly, through carefully arranged marriages with other royal families in Europe. These children established this incredibly intricate web of political and familial connections right across the continent.
So her daughter Victoria married the future German emperor. Alfred married into the Russian royal family. Alice into the House of Hesse.
Precisely. This network literally linked almost every major European monarchy back to Victoria. It was dynastic diplomacy on a grand scale.
It's fascinating how deeply intertwined those family dynamics were with international diplomacy. These weren't just weddings, they were strategic alliances.
Vital strategic alliances, reinforcing political ties, sometimes even diffusing tensions, creating this complex family of rulers who were literally related, cousins and in-laws on thrones across Germany, Russia, Greece, Romania, Norway, Sweden.
Even amidst all the national rivalries.
Exactly. It created a sort of interroyal network, though its effectiveness in preventing conflict is debatable, as World War I later showed.
And Albert himself, he wasn't just standing in the background, he was a major force.
Absolutely. Far more than just the Queen's consort. The source calls him an enlightened prince. He actively championed art, science, and education.
The Great Exhibition of 1851, that was his project, wasn't it?
His brainchild.
Oh.
Held in the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. A monumental success, showcasing global industry, art, technology. And spurred by that, Victoria, with Albert's strong support, championed reforms in industry, education, and science nationally.
So his intellectual interests directly influenced government priorities, pushing Britain towards innovation.
Definitely. He recognized that national prosperity was increasingly tied to scientific advancement and industrial skill.
But this partnership, this period of advancement, it came to such a sudden, tragic end, Albert's death in 1861.
A devastating blow. From typhoid fever, most likely. It plunged Victoria into this prolonged period of intense mourning. She withdrew almost completely from public life.
For over a decade, wasn't it, the widow of Windsor?
Yes, rarely seen, almost a recluse in her own palaces. Her grief was profound, overwhelming, and it definitely affected the public perception of the monarchy for a time.
But she did eventually return to a more active public role.
She did, albeit often still dressed in black. It showed immense resilience, that deep sense of duty kicking back in, even after some personal catastrophe.
So what did that whole cycle, the withdrawal, the grief, the eventual return mean for the monarchy?
Well, initially the public sympathized. But as the years dragged on, there was criticism, calls for her to resume her duties. However, her eventual re-engagement, especially around big events like her Golden Jubilee in 1887,
And the Diamond Jubilee in 1897.
exactly, those massive public celebrations really helped to reestablish the connection. It humanized her, showed her resilience, her dedication. It resonated deeply and solidified her bond with her subjects.
Okay, so her reign didn't just cover politics and family. It literally gave its name to the whole epoch, the Victorian period. What defined this era socially, culturally? How did it balance tradition and this relentless modernization?
It was fundamentally a time when England was trying to strike this balance between traditional values and modernization, often with really complex, sometimes contradictory results.
We talk about Victorian morality. What did that actually entail?
Well, the source notes it imposed very strict rules on family structure, sexuality, societal norms generally. Big emphasis on duty, self-control, domesticity, respectability, sobriety, thrift, hard work.
And religion played a big part.
A huge part. There was a notable increase in religious adherence, driven partly by evangelical movements. This often went hand in hand with a strong emphasis on a strict social hierarchy. Class divisions were deeply ingrained, often seen as almost natural or divinely ordained.
But alongside this rigidity, there was a massive cultural flourishing.
Incredible flourishing. Distinct Victorian influences in literature, architecture, art, fashion. Things we still recognize instantly today.
You mentioned literature, Dickens, obviously.
Dickens, yes, reflecting the social problems and the human relationships of the era. Oliver Twist, hard times, laying bare poverty, injustice, but also Thomas Hardy, exploring fate in rural life. And the Bronte sisters.
Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, powerful stuff about women's roles, passion, morality within those tight constraints.
Exactly. And architecturally, you had the widespread adoption of the Gothic revival style. Pointed arches, stained glass, intricate detail. Think Houses of Parliament.
It's a sort of romantic look back to the medieval past.
Partly, yes. A reaction against classical symmetry, perhaps a yearning for something more spiritual or organic in an industrializing world.
And the queen herself, how does she fit into this cultural picture?
She played a significant role, often indirectly. Her emphasis on family, her personal conduct, especially after Albert's death, her very image, it made her a powerful symbol of the era. She embodied many of those Victorian virtues: duty, domesticity, morality, imperial dignity.
It raises that question, though, was this morality imposed from the top down, or was it more a reflection of broader societal anxieties and changes?
That's the debate, isn't it? Was it elite-driven or a collective response to the rapid changes in industrialization, urbanization, scientific challenges? And the literature often both embodied and critiqued these norms simultaneously. That tension is what makes it so fascinating.
It really is, and it's striking how some of those values, or at least the echoes of them around family, public behavior, maybe even work ethic, they still linger, don't they?
They absolutely do. The legacy is complex, but it's definitely still with us in subtle ways.
Now, underpinning all this cultural and social change was the economy. The Industrial Revolution hitting its stride, Britain's golden age, economically speaking.
Unquestionably. Immense advancements in steam power, revolutionizing transport and factories, the explosion of railways connecting the country like never before, speeding up commerce, huge innovations in the textile industry
Making Britain the world's factory.
and its trade center, exporting goods globally, importing raw materials to feed those industries. It was an engine of unprecedented economic might.
And crucially, this economic power directly fueled the empire's expansion.
Directly. The industrial engine provided the wealth, the technology, the logistical capacity, faster ships, better weapons to project British power across the globe. The acceleration of technological innovation was key. The telegraph.
Instant communication across vast distances changed everything for administration and finance.
The steam engine, not just factories but ships, changing maritime trade, naval power fundamentally, and the railway network, first in Britain, then spreading through the colonies, shrinking the world, connecting the empire.
But we touched on this earlier, the social cost. How did the era connect economic growth with social welfare, if at all?
Well, there was a growing awareness, albeit slow, that industrialization created massive problems for the working class. So social reforms did emerge, aimed, at least partly, at improving the living conditions of the working class.
Things like limiting working hours, factory safety regulations, restricting child labor.
Yes, often piecemeal, often fiercely resisted by factory owners, but the beginnings of state intervention were there. In that sense, the source calls Victoria's reign a pioneer of modernization, recognizing gradually that the state had some role in mitigating the worst effects of industrial capitalism.
If we connect that to the bigger picture, then industrial power fuels the empire, but it also forces these domestic social changes, even if imperfectly.
Exactly. Often driven by social agitation, by reformers, by writers like Dickens exposing the grim realities. It shows that internal contradiction. Britain is the world's workshop, but grappling profoundly with the human cost of that progress at home.
So for the everyday person, especially the working class, what was life like? Connected by telegraph, riding trains, but living through.
A period of immense, rapid, often disorienting change. Stark contrasts. Huge wealth for some, grinding poverty for many, especially in those new, sprawling industrial cities. Uncertainty, but also perhaps new opportunities for some. It forced everyone to adapt to entirely new ways of living, working, and even thinking.
Okay, moving beyond the factories. The Victorian era was also this incredible time for science, intellectual ferment.
Absolutely. And Victoria, perhaps quietly, was a monarch who supported scientists and inventors. Royal patronage, even just symbolic interest, could create an environment where innovation was valued.
And the innovations were truly groundbreaking. Darwin comes to mind immediately.
Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, published 1859, just monumental. Introducing the theory of evolution by natural selection. The source notes its widespread impact, and that's an understatement.
It went far beyond biology, didn't it? Profoundly influenced human history, biology, and philosophy.
Completely shifted paradigms. And here's where it gets really interesting. How does this revolutionary idea, challenging biblical accounts of creation, humanity's special place, how does that land in a society known for its deep religious conviction?
It must have caused uproar, intense debates.
Huge controversies, clashes between scientists and theologians. Think of the famous 1860 Oxford debate between Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, and Bishop Wilberforce. It forced a fundamental reevaluation of everything.
And alongside Darwin, other foundational work was happening. Michael Faraday.
Michael Faraday, yes. His pioneering work on electromagnetism back in the 1830s, absolutely fundamental. Laid the groundwork for all electrical technology. We literally wouldn't have the modern world without his discoveries.
It's easy to forget the origins of things like electricity.
And it wasn't just individual geniuses. The era saw a proliferation of scientific institutions and museums. The British Museum's natural history collections, new universities, learned societies, these actively encouraged scientific research, provided places for collaboration, sharing knowledge.
So there's this synergy happening, science and technology feeding off each other.
A powerful feedback loop. Scientific discovery fueled new industries. Chemical, electrical, and the demands of industry spurred more scientific questions. It was crucially intertwined with industrialization and technological innovation. The Victorian era really did set the stage for so much of our modern technological world.
Okay, so Britain's this industrial powerhouse, scientific leader with a global empire. How did it manage its foreign policy, keep its place at the top?
It was a constant balancing act. England pursued a balance of power policy in world politics. The main goal was to prevent any single European power, France, Russia, later Germany, from becoming too dominant and threatening British interest, especially its trade routes in colonies.
So managing the competition among major powers in Europe.
Exactly. It involved strategic alliances, diplomatic pressure, sometimes limited military interventions like the Crimean War against Russia in the 1850s. Keeping Europe in a state of manageable equilibrium was seen as vital for imperial security.
And Victoria's family ties, the grandmother of Europe, played into this.
They added this unique human dimension to diplomacy, as the source says. It wasn't just states dealing with states. It was often literally family. Cousins, in-laws on different thrones.
So did those personal relationships actually smooth things over? Or was it just a surface thing?
That's the million-dollar question. Hard to quantify. They certainly provided invaluable informal channels, a shared language, a certain understanding. Maybe it softened the edges sometimes, but ultimately, national interests and hard political calculations usually trumped family feeling, especially as tensions rose towards the end of the century.
And while managing Europe, Britain was still expanding its colonies, but trying to avoid major wars.
That was often the preference, yes. While expanding, they paid attention to avoiding major wars with other great powers. Colonial policy often involved diplomacy, treaties with local rulers, strengthening local administrations under British oversight. Though military force, or the threat of it, was always there as a backup.
India is a key example here, especially after Albert's death.
Yes. The strengthening of British rule in India became much more direct after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The British Crown took over direct rule from the East India Company in 1858. Victoria was later proclaimed Empress of India in 1876, symbolizing that direct control. And British dominance was consolidated in other regions too, through various means.
So, for you, the listener, thinking about this, it's this complex mix of symbolic power, family ties, shrewd diplomacy, economic muscle, and underlying military strength that shaped the world map we see today.
Absolutely. Many of the international relationships, the power dynamics, even some of the geopolitical fault lines have their roots in this period.
Sure.
Her reign was absolutely central to the making of the modern world order.
Right, we've covered politics, empire, family, the era itself. What about Victoria, the person? How did she connect with her people? Why was she so enduringly popular despite everything?
In her early years, she really did capture the public imagination. A young, energetic, and modern monarch, as the source puts it. A fresh start after her less reputable uncles. She embodied dignity, morality.
And even her grief after Albert died. It connected with people.
Initially, yes. Her withdrawal was understood by the public. There was genuine empathy. People grieved with her. It showed she was human, capable of profound loss like anyone else.
And her eventual return to public life, those jubilees, they cemented that connection.
They really did. They demonstrated her human side, again, her resilience, her dedication over decades.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't just about duty, it showed a shared journey. While she didn't use direct political power, Victoria secured the continuity of the monarchy by gaining the respect and love of the people.
That popular support was crucial for the monarchy's survival.
Absolutely. It played a major role in the survival of the British monarchy to this day. In an age of rising democracy and republicanism, that deep public affection, that moral authority, was arguably more important than any constitutional power she held. Her personal story actually humanized the institution.
It's really striking, isn't it, how a personal narrative, even one of grief, became this powerful tool for public connection and loyalty. It speaks volumes about the human element in leadership.
It really does.
So when we pull all these threads together, what does it all mean? From that sheltered girl in Kensington Palace to the Empress presiding over this vast global empire, Queen Victoria was clearly far more than just a figurehead.
Far more. She was a symbol, yes, a powerful one, but also an architect in the subtle but significant ways of modern Britain and, you could argue, the modern world. She navigated and influenced this period of just immense, often chaotic change.
The social, cultural, economic, scientific, political, it all happened on her watch.
And her reign shows us how a monarch, even within a constitutional system, can profoundly shape national identity, global influence, societal values. Her personal journey, her family, her very distinct approach to leadership, they were all tangled up with the huge transformations of the Victorian age. It proves leadership isn't just about direct commands. Symbolic power and moral authority can be incredibly potent forces.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. What enduring elements of that Victorian age do you still see echoing in the world around us today? Maybe in our social norms, our technology, our institutions, even our ideas about family or public life.
And what does her long reign tell us about that delicate, ever-shifting balance between a symbolic figure and the exercise of actual power? How has that relationship continued to evolve since her time?
Lots to think about there. We hope this deep dive into Queen Victoria has given you some fresh perspectives and maybe sparked a desire to explore even further.